In this part of the video, we're going to be talking about the impact of wood species on different types of retrofit hardware. We'll be looking at Douglas fir. We'll be looking at close grain redwood, also called old growth redwood, and we'll be looking at open grain redwood, also called modern redwood. So all this wood has a different impact on the hardware. So if the hardware will either be weaker or stronger depending on the hardware, and we're going to take a look at that. The next thing we're going to look at are edge distances. So for example, nails, screws, bolts, etc. The distance from the edge of the wood has a big impact on their ability to resist earthquakes. So if it's in the center of a 2x4, it'll have a certain strength. If it's right next to the edge, it'll have a certain strength. And in retrofit, we have to worry about that because we're always putting this hardware in. We have these weird configurations of framing, and we're always having to look at the edge distances. And the last thing we're going to look at is the impact of pressure-treated wood on the ability of fasteners, again, the bolts and the lag screws and the nails, to maintain their integrity. Pressure-treated wood does tend to degrade metal, especially fasteners, and we're going to be looking at that. This table is found in the building code, and what it does is it tells us what the specific gravity is of different types of wood. And the reason that's important is that the specific gravity tells us how well a fastener, a nail, a bolt, a screw will stay in the wood when it's shaken by an earthquake. So the denser it is, the higher the specific gravity, the better able the nail or the fastener is to remain where it should be in the event of an earthquake. We're going to be looking at Douglas fir, which has a certain specific gravity. Then we're going to be looking at close grain redwood, which is the same as old growth redwood, and then we're going to be looking at open grain redwood, which is the same as your newer growth redwood after we cut down all the redwood trees. So in seismic retrofit work, we're dealing with three types of wood. We're dealing with Douglas fir, we're dealing with close grain redwood, which is the same as the old growth redwood. And we see that about, from 1932 before. When they still had some nice big redwood trees around. And then after they cut most of them down, we start seeing the open grain, or it's the newer wood, also what you find in tree farms. And what this does is it creates a multiplier. So based on specific gravity, we have a multiplier times all the different types of hardware. So for example, here we have a hardware when it's tested in Douglas fir. So here it was in Douglas fir. The manufacturer tested it, and he discovered that it can resist 1,530 pounds of earthquake force. Now we take that number and we multiply it times 0.88, which is the multiplier for the specific gravity. And we end up with this, 1,346. Now if we're going into open grain redwood, we take that multiplier, we multiply it times the value in Douglas fir, and we ended up with this, 1,132. Now you can see what a big difference that is. A lot of designers, what they'll do, engineers included, I've seen this many times, they'll just look in the catalog, see the number 1530, go, okay, I'm going to design my retrofit using that without keeping this in mind. And you can see it's actually over a 25% difference in strength. So this is really critical to always look at the species of wood. When we're under a house, we always take a look and see what type of wood it is, and we adjust accordingly. So this is actually a very important part of any retrofit. The same thing goes with other types of hardware, your shear transfer ties. Here we have an L90. If we're going into old growth redwood, we have to multiply that times 0.88, and we end up with 814 pounds of earthquake resistance. Same thing with the open grain redwood. We end up with, we multiply that times the 0.74, and we end up with 684 pounds. So it really makes a big difference. So anytime you're doing design, you should always watch out for that. Whenever you hire a contractor, you should also ask them, what type of wood are you going to be going into, and what kind of multiplier are you going to use, depending on the type of wood you find. If you find an engineer or contractor who has no idea what you're talking about, you should either educate them or maybe look for somebody else. So now we're going to be looking at the impact of edge distances on retrofit fasteners such as bolts, screws, and nails. So the first thing I'd like to point out right here, this is a table from the manufacturer of an SDS screw made by Simpson Strong-Tie. We use these all the time. So this table tells us that the shear capacity is 250 pounds per screw if it has a penetration of 2 inches, and more importantly, what it tells us is that it shall have a minimum edge distance of 3/4 of an inch. This is really critical. So here's an example of an SDS screw that goes into this piece of hardware. This is a foundation plate or a foundation anchor. And so here's a screw, and here's a screw, and here's a screw, and here's a screw, and here's a screw. And that table we just looked at tells us about the edge distances. And the edge distance is from this edge of the wood right here to the center of the screw. So right here, it tells us that the minimum edge distance is 3/4 of an inch. So the minimum between this screw, and the center of this screw in here is 3/4 of an inch. If we get any closer, we get to 5/8, we get to 1/4, whatever it is, the screw is not going to perform as we want it to perform. And so that's why these edge distances are so critical. Now, this one is such that you have a screw that's right here in the middle where it belongs. This one is too low. You can see that probably the edge of the mud sill is probably about right here. So this one is so far out of tolerance, it's probably worthless. Here's another one, the exact same thing. Here's the edge of the wood, and then this one right here is way too close to the edge of the wood. And so we'd have to say this one is out of tolerance as well. So we can say, this screw's not doing anything. This one looks pretty good. It's right in the middle where it belongs. And then this one I can't really tell, but I think it's down here low where it should not be. So it looks like 3 out of the 5 screws are not going to work. And this piece of hardware, which let's say this is an old growth redwood, it looks like. So if we say it's worth 1,300 pounds of earthquake resistance, we have to drop that by 60%, and so it really comes down low. So when you follow one of these plans that says, hey, let's put in 10 UFPs, that's what type of hardware this is, and you go ahead and put them in, and you put them in like this, well, they're not going to work. And so that's why you need to really watch these tolerances. And if you hire a contractor, ask him, hey, tell me a little bit about the, what the edge distances that you're going to be worried about. Where these screws need to go. Ask them about the species of wood and figure out your specific gravity tolerances. All those things, they seem small, but I'm telling you, you install a bunch of hardware incorrectly, and you practically shouldn't have installed anything at all, because you'll do all that work and you do it improperly and it's not going to work. So just briefly, I'm going to show you a contrast between one that's improperly installed and one that's properly installed. As you can see right here, these screws go right through the middle, exactly where they're supposed to be. So it's this looks like 1.5 inches right here. Remember, there's 3/4 inch tolerance. We have 3/4 inch from here to the center screw, and we have it all the way down the line. And as I just showed you, this one's got one here, 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 down below. There's no rhyme or reason to this one right here. So whenever when you're done with your contractor retrofitting and you want to take a look and make sure it was done correctly, go along and just see if that it was installed just like this, and you'll get exactly what you want to have happen when the earthquake hits. So the exact same thing applies with nails. We also have to worry about edge distances. We don't worry about end distances too much. Practically it never comes up, so that's why I'm not going to discuss it here. So this says we have to have 2.5 D, and D stands for diameter. So if there's a nail, it needs to be away from the edge 2.5 diameters of that particular nail. So let's say that the nail it's a pretty big one, at 1/4 inch. So we need to put from the edge, we need to go twice that, which is 1/2 inch. And then half of that, which is 1/8. So we need to be 5/8 of an inch away from the edge for the nail to be effective. Now this comes up when we have pieces of hardware like this. This is an L90, and let's say this piece of wood was, let's say it's just not very much there, and then when we put these nails down, so there's nails that come down this way, and there's the nails here. So like this is connected to this piece of wood through the nails that come in here, and then the nails that come across here. And let's say the edge distance from here to that nail is, let's say it's 1/8 of an inch, or let's say it's 1/4 of an inch. And let's just simply say it's not enough. And then the retrofit will not work properly. If you go and look at it, you go, oh yeah, the hardware's there, it should be fine. You don't see anything a problem, but if you don't keep these tolerances in mind, which are all based on tests in laboratories, if you don't keep these things in mind, what happens is earthquake hits, the nail doesn't perform as it's supposed to, you don't get the capacity you need out of you're supposed to, the hardware fails early, it just goes on and on. So again, this is why the edge distances are so important to be concerned with. So right now we're going to go over the impact of pressure-treated wood on seismic retrofits. The way you can tell if it's pressure-treated is these hatches. You see the lines, little lines here, these incisions in the wood. They actually inject preservative under pressure in Douglas fir, and so you have to put these incisions in order to really drive the preservative deep into the wood. So pressure-treated wood, I think around the 1930s it was invented, but it wasn't really used much until the mid-1970s. That's when we started to see it. And there was actually, we see some redwood back then, we see some pressure treated back then. I'd say it's mostly the redwood, the open grain redwood, but as the Howards get newer and newer, you start to see more of the pressure treated stuff. And then the original pressure treated was actually treated with arsenic, and there was a real concern that people would get sick. In fact, people did get sick, so they switched over to something called ACQ, and that was in 2002. And everything built after 2002 with pressure treated wood has ACQ lumber in it. And it's a Douglas fir, but it's the ACQ is a big deal because it will deteriorate fasteners, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. So here's a screw that was put into ACQ pressure treated wood, and as you can see, it's almost disappeared. I don't know how long it was in the wood, but we've seen some pretty serious deterioration in rather short periods of time. What happens in ACQ lumber is that the C stands for copper, and the ferrous molecules in the steel, they migrate to the copper because they're dissimilar materials, and it causes this kind of deterioration. Now, the previous years of pressure-treated wood until 2002, the ones that were made with arsenic, they don't do this. I mean, or at least they do it a little bit. I mean, we always use a galvanized fasteners, but I mean, it doesn't anywhere compare to this. So I don't know how long this was actually in the wood, but we've seen some situations where the bolt or the fastener wasn't in the wood for very long, and they really suffered a lot of damage. So here's some steel that simply touched ACQ pressure-treated wood for looks like quite some time, and then it deteriorated. And the only solution in terms of fasteners is you must use stainless steel. So here's a photograph of some stainless steel nails. You can also get stainless steel screws, you can get stainless steel bolts, you can get stainless steel anything you want. So anyway, that's the solution. Now, as you just saw, there's so many things that come into play in terms of how you're going to retrofit, bolt the mud sill to the foundation and attach anything to the mud sill. And let's just go ahead and review those right now. The ACQ lumber is a big one. So we'll actually be working under a house, and we'll see where a mud sill has been replaced. And they took out the old redwood and they put in the pressure treated wood, after 2002. And we look at it and we go, well, we have to switch over to stainless steel. Otherwise, everything we put in is just going to deteriorate. So that's one of the things that we have to look at. The other thing we have to look at is the species of wood. So when again, sometimes we'll be under the house and we'll see part of it will be redwood, then we'll see some of this Douglas fir, and whatever we happen to see. We need to know the capacity so that we can make sure and get the kind of retrofit that you want. And the next thing, of course, we need to look at is the edge distances. This is one that we see missed all the time. An engineer will a contractor will just get under there and say, okay, I just need to put this up and just make it fit, do whatever I possibly can just to make it fit in there. And if you get the edge distances off, he doesn't even bother to look. So that's what we have to consider. All these things when we're doing a seismic retrofit is not as simple as just putting up some hardware, as some retrofit guidelines, as some contractors, and even some, actually engineers as well. So anyway, I hope this information has helped you make decisions about retrofitting your home, and especially help you interview contractors, and really I think this is very important, that give you the ability to go look at your own retrofit and decide whether it was done correctly or not.